Hello everyone. Welcome to Women and Children First, the virtual edition. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First. We're one of the last remaining feminist bookstores in the United States, and we're so delighted and excited to have all of you here to join us in celebrating the paperback release of The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. We are also so excited to have Moya Bailey here to interview Chanda, and she is the author of Misogynoir Transformed, and she is here in Chicago. We're neighbors. So please join me in beginning our event with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that our bookstore stands on the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. Illinois is home to 75,000 Indigenous people, and we strive to honor Native histories, literature, and communities. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. A good place to start is nativeland-ca. And we also want to go beyond the words to the work and uplift all the projects being done by the American Indian Center of Chicago. I'll put a link to all this in the chat. Women and Children First is now open for in-store browsing. We do continue to require masks being worn at all times inside the store. We also ship anywhere in the United States and continue to offer curbside pickup. A few little notes. If you want to ask a question today, be sure to put your question in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen, and Moya will read this to Chanda later in the event. If you haven't bought the paperback edition of The Disordered Cosmos, you can do so by clicking the Buy the Book button at the bottom of the screen. And I will also put a link to Moya's book in the chat. Okay, I think we're on to the main event. Chanda Prescod-Weinstein is an assistant professor of physics and astronomy and core faculty in women's and gender studies at the University of New Hampshire. She is also a columnist for New Scientist and Physics World. Her research in theoretical physics focuses on cosmology, neutron stars, and dark matter, and she is active in Black feminist science, technology, and society studies. Essence magazine recognized her as one of 15 Black women who are paving the way in STEM and breaking barriers. A co-founder of the Particles for Justice movement, she has received the 2017 LGBT+ Physicist Acknowledgement of Excellence Award for her contribution to improving conditions for marginalized people in physics, as well as the 2021 American Physical Society Edward A. Boucher Award for her contributions to particle cosmology. Moya Bailey is an associate professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Northwestern. Her work focuses on marginalized groups' use of digital media to promote social justice, and she is interested in how race, gender, and sexuality are represented in media and medicine. She is the digital alchemist for the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network and the board president of Allied Media Projects, a Detroit-based movement media organization that supports an ever-growing network of activists and organizers. She's also the co-author of #Activism and is the author of Misogynoir Transformed. She's an MLK visiting scholar at MIT for the 2020-2021 academic year. I'm so deeply excited for this conversation. Moya's book is so radical and revolutionary, and just it is a revelation, a true revelation to read and experience. So please help me and join me in welcoming Chanda Prescod-Weinstein and Moya Bailey.
Yay!
Yay, thank you.
I'm so excited to be doing this with you. We had the pleasure of doing this for my book just not that long ago, this time last year. And it's so exciting to hear about where the book has gone and how the hardback has made room for the paperback. So the first question I want to ask you is kind of getting in the details and maybe just hyping the book a little bit. How many editions of the hardback were there? How many different printings were there of the hardback?
So I think it's in its 7th printing now, and they're not actually taking it out of print. So the hardcover remains in print even with the paperback release. Yeah, so 7 printings, I think, total.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so I think that's really important to note because it's unusual, I think, for books about science and books that actually have this scholarly and I would say popular interest intersection coming together in such an accessible way. I think that's a really wonderful aspect of what you've been able to create. And even as you've done this, though, you've made some changes to the book from the hardback edition to the paperback. I wonder if you might want to say a little bit about what's different in the paperback than in the hardback.
Yeah, so first I have to acknowledge stores like Women and Children First. Like the reason that the hardcover sold the way that it did has a lot to do with indie bookstores and has a lot to do with bookstores that maybe you don't run out for that new like popular science book usually and put it in the window. But actually, one of my Particles for Justice crew sent me a photo of the Disordered Cosmos in the Women and Children First window. So I know that the store is one of the stores that did that. And I really do think it made a big difference that people were willing to take a chance and say, well, she's writing from a feminist frame, from a Black feminist frame. So maybe we actually can use this book to attract audiences to science and to go on that journey with me. And so that said, I think like one of the things that I was called to change or felt like I needed to address in the book is that when I was writing the book, and I feel like I have to say, keep in mind that the world was in many ways felt like a different place because I wrote the first draft in the summer of 2019. I was very focused on wanting to write a book that was like, hey, Black women, hey, non-binary kids, like, hey, all of these people who have been excluded from physics or feel excluded from physics. This is a book for you. And I didn't realize that in the process of doing that I was also going to pull in readers who I want to acknowledge it. For me, it says Moya is waiting to reconnect. She's been having issues with her internet, so I'm just going to keep talking because I know that Moya is here with me in spirit. But I felt like, oh, you can hear me. Good.
I can totally hear you.
You can totally hear me. So I feel like, I didn't realize that was going to draw in people who don't usually read popular science. And therefore, we're unfamiliar with it as a genre, as a form, but also people who are maybe coming to it experiencing some anxiety because of genuine, I'm careful with the use of the word trauma, but I do think that a lot of trauma happens in school, particularly for people from marginalized backgrounds. And so that people were going to bring their anxiety about science to the book. And I don't think that I attended to that in all of the ways that I could have. And that's something that I will really have to remedy with the next book. But one of the things that I did for this one is I wrote a note to readers talking about that and also reflecting a little bit on how my upbringing in a British colonial household on both sides meant that I also come at things with a little bit of a stiff upper lip attitude. And that vulnerability that readers had offered me, that was something that I was going to have to do better on reflecting. So that was one thing. And the other thing is that the physics of melanin, for a variety of reasons, is a hard chapter. And so I rewrote the opening, I reorganized parts of it to make it flow better. And I still feel like I probably just need to write a book about that because I don't feel happy with what's left. But those were two of the major changes. There's also a reading guide that was done in collaboration with a fellow Black queer woman who has a STEM degree, and Shirley Nwangwa. She was amazing. So that was fun.
Amazing. I think another piece in terms of what you just talked about is the cover itself being an entry point for people, creating an opportunity for people to not just see it in the display window, but be excited about seeing it in the display window. I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about the cover and also the figures that you put in, because I think the figures themselves also do a lot of work of making it accessible to a lay audience. And I know that you have a special relationship with one of the illustrators. So I wondered if you might talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so definitely the visuals that we get with the book, I have to give credit to my childhood best friend, sister from another mister, Sharifa Zainab Williams, who not only drew most of the figures that appear in the book, so any of the hand-drawn figures that are in the book, that's Sharifa's handiwork. So by the way, if you're a Book Riot fan, she's the, I always get the title wrong, but she's like the executive director for creative, for creative efforts at Book Riot. Her title just changed and I still can't get it right. And Sharifa was also the person when we were trying to figure out the cover who sat me down and was like, okay, we're just going to like figure out a cover that works for you. And I think like there was a piece of that of having someone, we've known each other since we met like in the yard between our houses when we were 5, right? So we've known each other for almost 35 years. And she knew me in a way. I think there was also a piece that there were, in a lot of ways, like you look at the cover, and Sharifa and I both have hair like this. We both have that like curl. And so I think there was an element of it of like us putting ourselves on the cover. Like I realized like later that like when my hair is short, this is kind of what my silhouette looks like. And putting ourselves on the cover, but wanting to put something where people like us and people who don't look like us, because it's the cosmos, that you can fill yourself into this cover, right? That's part of what's really beautiful about it. So a lot of that credit goes to Sharifa. I will say with the figures that I gave her the physics that needed to be captured, and I gave her examples from books by white men where I was like, here's a similar figure that captures this physical concept. And then she came up with, like, I actually wish there was a table of contents with the figures in it. Somewhere in the book, there's a figure called Gravity Girl. And she's got her little afro puffs. And that was totally all Sharifa's doing. I cried when I first saw it because like I had never seen a little girl with afro puffs in like a spaceship in one of these like popular science books for adults. Like you increasingly see stuff like that in children's books, that kind of thing. But it was just different. And I think Sharifa could probably sell prints of that and do okay.
Yes, I think the figures are just lovely. I mean, relatedly, I'm curious how you decided which figures you wanted. What let you know that those were the figures that needed to be illustrated?
Yeah, wow. Okay, I haven't been asked any questions like this one before. And so definitely when I first proposed the book, I didn't really think that so much science was going to come out of me in the writing process. And so I didn't have the idea that I was going to do figures at all. And so I'm like really lucky that my best friend knows how to draw because I can't draw for shit. And so I needed someone who I trusted and who knew what they were doing and could and would be willing to do it for me like relatively quickly. Some of it was like I think me starting to realize that I was getting into scientific concepts where people were going to feel uncomfortable without a visual. And I think I was probably a little bit late to the game in thinking about that, because I am more comfortable with equations on paper than with drawings. I'm not visual in my approach to science in the way that some other people are. And so definitely there was an element of this that was a learning experience for, you know, even though there was a piece of me that was writing to my 17-year-old self, that I also needed to write to people who are unlike me. And so I think that that was one of the major motivations for me in including the figures. There were a couple that were tricky in that there was one figure that actually came out of a scientific paper that I didn't want to use the exact scientific paper version of the figure, because I just thought it would be too technical. Like, it had a bunch of numbers and more information in it than like someone from a general audience needed. But I basically wanted to use like the exact same figure. And so there was also kind of this awkwardness of writing to the scientists that I had never spoken to before in Australia, and being like, hey, can my best friend redraw your figure for inclusion in this book that's like maybe a little bit different from the traditional popular science book? And there was that kind of weird, like, this is all now in the hands of some white guy halfway across the globe that I don't know, that I probably can't include this figure ethically if he says no. And you know, the really nice thing actually has been that everybody in the community who's been willing to speak out loud to me about the book has been really positive about it. And he was really, I had forgotten how much scientists are displeased when people read our work. So he was just like really happy that I liked the figure that much. And so that was a nice thing. And I guess, you know, this reminds me of something that just happened that's unrelated to the figures, but actually I got an email from a scientist in Australia whose papers I had been reading for years and had been informing my scientific work. And he works in a different area of physics, but part of what I do is translate work from that area into dark matter physics. And he wrote to me and said, I read your book, so then I looked up your papers and realized there's crossover between what you think about and what I think about. So would you like to talk science? And my brain, like, I literally was exchanging emails with him today about setting a time for our team to meet, which is like amazing. So the book has also now become part of my journey in actually making my science happen, which is something that was like very unexpected.
That's fantastic. I think that's one of the things that is so, I don't know, visionary about a book like this, that perhaps it is supposed to speak to one audience, but then you're surprised because clearly it speaks to multiple, and even ones that you don't expect or anticipate. But one of the things that you offer in there that I think is so helpful is this idea of white empiricism. And, you know, these two scientists actually are sort of operating outside of that. But I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about how you came to white empiricism and what you feel like it offers.
Yeah, so I guess like maybe it's useful. Is it useful for me to read a little bit from the section?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to say, like, I'm probably like the only person who's like really thrilled with the title of this chapter, but I was really, I don't know, I'm like king of the dad joke or whatever. So the chapter is called the Anti-Patriarchy Agender, which I just, yeah, I like it. I'm a dork. So we have been talking about white empiricism, and so now I have to find, where's the first mention of it? So I think I first mentioned it on page 170 in the paperback. So I define it here is as a practice of ignoring information about the real world that isn't considered to be valuable or specifically important to the physics community at large, which is oriented toward valuing the ideas and data that are produced by white men. And I talk here about, I developed this argument by using the specific example of how Black women are treated in the scientific workplace and juxtaposing it against a debate about whether actual observations and experiments are necessary to support theories of quantum gravity. And So to give a little more context to that, there is a debate now about whether we actually need any physical evidence for string theory's correctness, because it's such a beautiful theory mathematically that maybe the beauty of the theory is sufficient, and the fact that it works in certain ways is sufficient. And so I was very interested by the idea that this was taken seriously enough that people write papers with a straight face saying that maybe we don't need evidence, right? And not everybody agrees with this point, so I don't want to like label the physics community. This is not at all a consensus position, and it's really a minority perspective, but it's one that's sufficiently serious that people can write publications about it and not get laughed out of the room. I was interested by the juxtaposition of that with Black women can be reporting for decades, centuries, this is what racism looks like, this is what misogynoir looks like. And people are like, yeah, I'm just not sure that that's what it was. Like, I mean, just because he asked if your hair is like a wig doesn't mean that it was bias, which like, I'm picking that example because that's one that happened to me in the lunch line when I was working at NASA. The guy was like, your hair is really nice. Is that real or is it a wig? Like, where'd you get it from? Right. And so I was just interested by that juxtaposition. The other thing that was happening is that I was reading feminist philosophy of science, and it was really critical of how gender, and to a limited extent, how race was shaping outcomes in the life sciences. There seemed to be like a real serious grasp that the life sciences are not independent from these external social phenomena. But people kept invoking physics as what they would call the epistemic exception, because the laws of physics are universal, that therefore physics couldn't be affected in the same way, and that scientific outcomes couldn't be affected in the same way. And I was like, but the reason that I came to your book, or the reason that I came to your paper, is because I'm witnessing all this bullshit in the physics community, and I was looking for a vocabulary for it. And now you're telling me, here's the vocabulary that doesn't apply to you. And so on some level, I was picking a fight a little bit, maybe not picking a fight, but I had a bone to pick really with these like primarily white feminist philosophers of science who couldn't see how it worked in physics. I think that's like the less generous reading. I think the more generous reading is that physics is so dominant. Like there's literally Ewan Rees-Morris's book, When Physics Became King, that it is so empowered in a way that people who are not physicists don't feel empowered to critique physics. And that was something that I could do as an insider, but with, you know, the kind of outsider perspective that Alice Walker talks about in Search of Our Mother's Gardens, right? And so I was bringing that outsider perspective with that insider knowledge. And so that gave me a unique opportunity. I think like the reason that I finally like coined it and wrote it up, honestly, was because there was a CFP like deadline for the publication where I eventually published it. And I kind of gave that to myself as like, you have to write something about this. So you just have to submit that.
I love that. And this, I think, takes me to one of my next points is the really careful way that you integrate a lot of different voices into the text. So not just the voices of physicists, but also feminist writers, scholars, people across the board. So I'm curious about how you see speculative fiction, like you mentioned Samuel Delaney, Octavia Butler, how you see speculative fiction, science fiction, your love of Star Trek, perhaps, also playing into how you're theorizing this new possibility or how physics can kind of move in a different way.
Yeah, so the interesting thing, and again, like the weird thing about writing a book is that, you know, you write it and you're a person at the time that you write it. And then later when you have to go out and talk to people about the book that they're buying, you're like, yeah, so the me of 3 years ago, right? So the version of me that wrote this book was like a Star Trek fanatic that really didn't spend a lot of time with science fiction beyond Star Trek. And I mean like a Star Trek convention attending. Like I have my tickets for the con in Vegas this summer. And I've had them since last summer. Like that kind of like Star Trek attending like fan. The thing that's actually changed for me, and I think probably influences like the ways in which I was thinking about the paperback and the shifts that I wanted to make in the paperback, is that I started reading fantasy by Black women writers who are writing today. And so in particular, I'm like Tracy Dion's Legendborn, which like I stand Legendborn. If you have not read Legendborn, please go to the Women and Children First website and order that shit like right now. I feel similarly about Jordan Ifueko's Raybearer. So I read both of those in the months, just a few months before the book came out. And they really, for me, opened up Black girl magic, literal Black girl magic, in a way that I think, like, I read Tolkien over and over as a young person, and eventually didn't feel connected with it in a way. And this allowed me to kind of come back to that. So the way that it comes up in the book is, for example, in thinking about the physics of melanin and thinking about how melanin is actually this really incredible molecule, right? And wondering about the universe, the version of the universe, if there's a multiverse out there, where melanin is recognized as a glorious thing right off the bat, universally, globally. Because, like, look, there are some people who understood that already, but globally understood, recognized. Do we just have like a whole army of shuris like running around doing like genius shit with melanin, as opposed to a scenario where today people are starting to realize that melanin is this very interesting biomolecule that can maybe give us insight into developing new green technology oriented materials, but where you really have to worry about Blackness without Black people, that's always kind of like lurking. And so you have like this professor at MIT who has this architectural project that's like buildings with melanin. And then it's like, did you just like, is that like encasing a building in Black people's skin? Like there are all sorts of like, there's a little bit of J. Marion Sims and various other things happening in there.
Buildings. Oh no.
Yes. And so I think one of the hard things actually is that one of the reasons that the physics of melanin was a tough chapter was actually because as I was writing the book and going through drafts, the conversation on the ground was changing. And so the pressures I was feeling when I talk about melanin, what has to be said, what has to be addressed, and how do I do that with care as someone who is more lightly melanated and for whom some of these pressures are less written on the body. How do I attend to that? And at the same time, make these proclamations about like the Afrofuturist beauty of the molecule, which is really, that's all I wanted to say. Like the whole thing originally was just like, everybody, look, it's fucking awesome. But also recognizing that there were going to be some people who were like, I'm not in the mood for that right now. Mm-hmm. And needing to figure out how to write to both of those feelings at the same time.
I think that's very generous to even want to do that, to write to both of those feelings at the same time. And I think that's something that comes across in your work, the attention to multiple audiences and who might be listening. Speaking of chapters and chapter titles, I also really liked Black Feminist Physics at the End of the World. That chapter title was one of my faves. And I'm curious what you want people to get from that chapter. And also, do you think that there's something that physics perhaps offers Black feminism? Because I think you make a really clear argument about what Black feminism offers physics. So I'm just curious if there's something happening in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some way the book's existence and the arc of narrative, to the extent that it has narrative in the book, is me fleshing out an argument an idea that's not really mine. I think it's my mother's. And so people who are familiar with the book or have a copy, I know this already, but if you don't, one of the epigraphs at the start of the book is people need to know that we live in a universe that is bigger than the bad things that are happening to us. And that's Margaret Prescod, my mother, co-founder of Black Women for Wages for Housework. And she said this to me one day when I called her and was like, I need to be calculating right now for professional reasons, but also I want to be out organizing the way that you are. And I don't know what to do with these two simultaneous calls. And she just made that was like an offhand comment that I then like immediately told my spouse. I was like, write that down. It's actually, I'm hanging off the door in front of me with a magnet, the original note where he wrote it down. So I think part of the argument that I'm trying to make is that the cosmos and having a relationship with the cosmos, it can be a Black feminist activity. I think that in some sense, there's a practical element of this, which is that particle physics has for the last, now we're heading towards a century, existed in the ways that it has because of post-Manhattan Project federal largesse, because we were the darlings of the establishment. And I say we, air quotes, right? Because they didn't really have me in mind. And that time has come to an end. Particle physics is not the darling anymore. It's quantum information. It's quantum physics. And our funding is reflecting that. You can just see the theoretical physics budget transferring when you look at the appropriations to quantum information. So we need to make a different case for why we should exist, why anybody should pay us. And I think in some sense, we are now, we are with the humanities. We are not funded at those levels yet. And so I was also thinking about what is the case that I can make for why this is a thing that we should continue to do? And how can I make that case in a way that speaks to the values that I think will embody a livable world, allow us to live and coexist in ecosystems that are functional and not falling apart and not threatening all of the living beings in them with catastrophic destruction, or us not being like the part of the ecosystem that's so dominant and threatening that the ecosystems is totally out of whack. So I wanted to make the argument that our relationship with the cosmos is a piece of this. And that Black feminism, yes, can inform how we think about doing that work, but also that doing this work can motivate us to situate ourselves in context and step back and realize also that even as we are struggling, and I know there are people listening who have devoted so much of their lives to the struggle, that we also want to have dreams, and that our whole universe can't be the struggle, that there has to be something that we are struggling for on the other end of that. And so I have to take seriously my role as a griot, as the holder of those stories, as the keeper of those stories, as the maker of them, and therefore the communicator of them, which means I'm responsible for bringing them into the community. To remind people that there is something bigger than fucked up white supremacist, heterosis patriarchal capitalism. And that there's a universe that obeys rules that are totally transcendent beyond those rigid structures.
I love that. Again, getting us beyond our sort of myopic thinking and getting us to really take in the vastness of our existence and things beyond our mere existence. I wonder if you might talk a bit about what some of your favorite reactions to the book have been. So in addition to the scientists we mentioned earlier, are there particular people or stories that you've heard in reaction to the book that have been really moving to you?
I guess first I have to shout out Black women, particle physicists in Chicago. There are two in particular that I'm thinking of. So one, I'm thinking of Jessica Esquivel, who is a particle physics experimentalist at Fermilab, who reviewed the book for Nature Physics. And who specifically, she's a Black, Latina, lesbian, particle physicist. And so in a lot of ways, like, this is the person that I want to like the book, right? And she wrote this really beautiful review, and also talked about Gravity Girl and how important seeing Gravity Girl was for her. And that was special not only for me because Gravity Girl appeared in the book, but also such a reminder that, like, even though my name's on the cover, that it was a community effort, and that other people's pieces went into it, and that those pieces were being seen and individually recognized was really beautiful. The other person who actually ended up reviewing it was Katrina Miller, who is just wrapping up her PhD in particle experiment at the University of Chicago. And she's already become like an amazing science journalist. And I'm like so thrilled that there's another Black woman particle physicist who's doing science journalism. She wrote about it for Smithsonian Magazine's end of year roundup, and the blurb was like so beautiful, or the piece that she wrote was so beautiful that we actually pulled a blurb from it and put it on the cover of the book. And so just like coming back to like what's on the cover and what the cover represents is, so there's my name, there's the silhouette where we can see ourselves in it, and now there's actually another Black woman's words on the cover. And to have the book also speak to Katrina as a Black and Asian American woman, like Sharifa Williams is also Black and Asian American. There were just like so many pieces that for me, so I think that's just two examples of two, like, for me, magical readers.
I love that. I love that. Well, I want to make sure that we have time for questions from the audience. So people listening, feel free to ask your questions. We do have one question that's a very specific one. So the question is there a reading guide available independent of the paperback? I have my signed hardcover copy, but maybe I should just get the paperback as well.
I mean, so like, Women and Children First have really generously put this event on for free. So I am not going to miss my opportunity to strongly encourage people to shop the store. I will just say, like, one thing that I know is that these virtual events have been really great. And I love how they pull people around the world into the conversation. They do mean people aren't walking through the store and randomly buying books. And so I just want to encourage people to think about it. That said, and also you don't have to buy my book. You can buy Legendborn, you can buy Raybear, you can buy Misogynoir Transform. There are lots of options. To this specific question, I think that encouraging your library to get a copy of the paperback is certainly one option. The other thing that I'm going to say, and like I will get in trouble if I say anything more than this, but I will just say, like, in a few weeks, some ebook sellers may have it at a relatively more accessible amount. I will just say that some independent bookstores have a relationship with an ebook seller, so I would encourage you to check out Women and Children First relationships if they do have a partnership, and buy the ebook through a link on an indie bookshop, preferably this one. But I think one option is always to ask your library to stock it. And I think that, you know, getting the book into libraries also benefits the community.
Absolutely. Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to ask a question, and as that populates, I will ask another. So you've done a lot of media and book touring for the book. I wonder how that's been just logistically inside of a pandemic. How has that experience been for you? How are you feeling going into the launch of the paperback?
Yeah, I think, you know, I was angry about it at first, like going into like in fall of 2020, when, you know, the hardcover came out in March of last year. And so fall of 2020 is when we were starting to do our planning. And one of the things that was happening was that unfortunately, like indie stores were having the experience of people coming to these virtual events but not buying anything. And so one of the shifts that was happening was that stores didn't want to do events with authors who had a lot of events, because basically all of the virtual events that an author did were competing with each other and were creating competition for sales. And I totally, like, I'm very sympathetic to that, and clearly like obsessed with indies. So I wanted them all to stay open, right? So at first I was told I could only do 3 events. And it's like, you spend years like working on this book, imagining, engaging with audiences, going to like giving readings, all of these things, like things I've been really imagining since I was like a little kid, right? And then it's like 3 events. And then I got lucky that I ended up getting to do more. I think I did 5 bookstores initially, and then got to do a 6th a little while later. And I was also really lucky that like the feminist bookstores, the black owned bookstores that I wanted to do events with were like, hell yes, and did an amazing job of bringing people in. So I was angry about it going into it, but then what ended up happening is that like I now have this body of like conversations that are virtually available with like friends and writers that I admire. And it's been like a roving talk show. And I actually have like a record of all of these conversations. So the part of me that's interested in like archive and history is like archive. So I think that part has been exciting. And so then actually with the paperback release and doing some book events in person, I think I had difficulty making that transition, because in person felt awkward. You don't have a recording of it. There are typically fewer people. And then hybrid is also complicated. I did one event that was like in a large lecture hall where there were maybe 20 in-person attendees. And it felt really awkward because I was giving a talk. It was a book talk as opposed to a conversation. And I didn't know until afterwards that there were 160 people online. Right. And so there's also this like weirdness of like what hybrid means, that people are like, oh, actually, I thought I was going to go in person, but I don't feel like going. So now I'm going to do it virtually. And that's actually, you're both really sympathetic, because you're like, if I was on the other end of this, I would probably be having that same conversation with myself. But also being on this side of it, you're like, no, please just put your mask on, come. So I think it's complicated. I actually really like the virtual format. I like not having to leave my house, to be honest. Like I didn't have to put like my good yoga pants on. I put like the less good ones on for this.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience. What's the most interesting thing you learned about the physics of melanin? Maybe not related to the book, but just in general, things that you think about that people should know.
Okay, so like maybe actually instead of answering that question, I'm going to say that one of the things that when I woke up this morning that I was wondering about is I was thinking about pheomelanin and beta carotene. So for people who aren't familiar, so pheomelanin is the type of melanin that has like a reddish orange color. So people who have red hair have a lot of pheomelanin in their hair. And often those same people tend to have some in their skin. Like if you see like a lot of like red in undertones, there can be some pheomelanin there. And the reason it's not color, right, is because that's literally like, that's the color of the pheomelanin. Like that's why that color manifests, is that's literally the color of the molecule. So this morning when I woke up, I was thinking about why beta carotene and pheomelanin were similar colors. So beta carotene is like the thing that makes carrots orange. I don't know if I wanted a carrot this morning. Maybe my body's telling me something about like vitamin A. I don't know. So the question that I had that remains like unanswered, because like my black chemist friend who answers all of my stupid physicist questions about chemistry is like eating her way through Sweden right now, I think. Shout out to Ray Burks. Follow her on Twitter, Dr. Rubidium. So I was trying to figure out, like, why do they have similar colors? So I was wondering about the spectrum, and I looked up their chemical formulas, and my chemistry knowledge stops at like non-honors high school chemistry. So that wasn't super helpful to me, except that I noticed that they both have a lot of carbon and hydrogen. So maybe this is some kind of carbon hydrogen spectroscopy thing. I don't know. So that doesn't answer the question at all, but that's my latest like thing that I'm gonna learn about melanin, I guess. That's the thing I'm gonna learn. Stay tuned, follow me on Twitter. I guess once I find out the answer, I'll tweet about it.
Yes. Feel free to ask Corché, who is a young organic chemist that we both know, who just transitioned into PhD candidacy just this past week. So that's a good question there. And another question that is sort of more physics specific, does the book, or does your book have your latest work on axions? And I guess maybe another way to ask that might be, are you thinking about axions, and how are you thinking about them?
Yeah, so I guess I will explain maybe a little bit about what an axion is, right?
That sounds great.
I do talk in the book about axions. Axions are a hypothetical particle. So the axion is a hypothetical particle that was first hypothesized in the 1970s. It comes out of work. It's derived from work by two scientists, Roberto Pecci and Helen Quinn. And then it got the name axion from one physicist, Frank Wilczek. It was almost called the Higlet. Steve Weinberg called it the Higlet. I feel like that was a really big missed opportunity. I actually don't know if I included that comment in the book. I should have. And so this hypothetical particle was formulated really to address an issue that existed in particle physics. And then people at the same time were like, okay, so this dark matter problem is a serious problem. Like this question of like, why is there all of this matter in galaxies that seems to be totally invisible to us? And so people very quickly made the connection that the axion could also be the dark matter. And so that happened like right around the time that I was born. So people have been thinking about this question for a while. And so that's really my specialty. Is the thing I'm best known for in the community is my work on axion dark matter. And in particular, how it can behave similar to systems that we see in atomic physics. So that's where the connection with the Australian scientist I was talking about earlier comes up. So yeah, I'm thinking about axions a lot. Actually, my research group, in collaboration with people at Stanford and a university in India, and also at Carnegie Observatories, actually just posted new research to the preprint archive was that last Sunday? Man, my sense of time is really messed up. 2 Sundays ago. So there's actually no way to make sure that the books are up to date, because by the time, we did copy edits for this book in February. I think it went to the printer in February. Part of the supply chain issues is that books have to go early to make sure they actually get printed and delivered on time. So I think I have to say, I follow my updates on Twitter for the latest on axions. And I will also say that regular readers of my New Scientist column know that I like to answer questions from readers as like column topics. So if there's something that you really wanted to know about, you're always welcome to send me an email. I can't respond to all the emails that I get, but there's a chance that I will answer your email in a future column or article that I write. So I do try and keep the questions that people have in mind.
Fantastic. And I think this builds on that. And I'm going to ask the question, but then add my own little spin to it. Do you plan on putting out popular books on axions, dark matter, similar to how Brian Greene or Dan Hooper have done? And I guess my question for that is, do you feel like that there's more to be done in terms of making physics more accessible, having your work also be accessible in other mediums besides scientific journals?
Yeah, so I will add to the list Katie Freeze. I can't think of the name of her book, but Katie Freeze is also has published a book on dark matter, and there's actually a new one that I think is not out yet in English by a Dutch journalist named Robert Schilling. So I will just type that in the chat. Who is taking a journalist's point of view on dark matter. So there are books out there that are talking about dark matter. There also have been 2 interesting biographies of Vera C. Rubin, who was the woman who was behind the first substantive data for the existence of dark matter. And those biographies also get into it a lot. So I don't particularly feel like I need to write another book specifically about dark matter at this moment. But I do think one thing that I'm learning over and over again as I work with editors at like legacy publications, legacy scientific publications, is that even when I think I am being very much like a scientist about things, that my voice is still a little bit off the beaten path from what they were expecting. And so I see part of my contribution as writing in a voice that maybe feels more familiar to audiences that are usually not written to in popular science writing. So I do understand that is something that maybe I'm more uniquely positioned to do at this point than other people are. Although, of course, I'm already saying to Katrina, like, I'm looking forward to your popular science book from your point of view as a journalist, since that's the direction she's moving in. So I don't know if dark matter will necessarily be the direction that I go in. The thing that I want when I take on a big project like this, because there's so much work, not just from me that goes into it, my agent has to do a lot of work, but also my spouse has to do a lot of work. That poor dude read The Disordered Cosmos like 7 times, right? That I want it to be something where I feel like I'm doing something that adds. And so I think that I really have to think about what is something that I feel like is not being done that can be done. I do have an idea for what the next book for adults will be, but it won't quite be going in the direction of being really focused on one topic.
Well, thinking of that, my question for you is, how did you decide to do this even as you were an assistant professor? Like, you have a lot of demands from the academy on your time as well. So you made a decision to write this book in a way that, sometimes our institutions don't recognize or understand. But it seems like that there was something that pushed you to want to say this and to say it now. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think one, like, I really want to acknowledge that when I had good lawyer spouse support in negotiating my job, and so this was actually something that was encoded as part of my job, that I might do something like this, which is highly unusual in physics. I also, and I really want to state my appreciation for my colleagues in the University of New Hampshire Department of Physics and Astronomy, because there are not many departments that I think would have the imagination to be like, sure, we will hire you specifically for you to do the things that you're doing. And I specifically want to recognize Karsten Pohl, the chair who negotiated that for me and with me, who unfortunately passed away in the fall. But he was just a tremendous person who really had a vision of wanting a community where everybody really could just come to the table, including people who were very unlike him as a white German man of a particular generation. But he was just very enthusiastic, and it shows in the number of women faculty he hired, and the fact that not everybody was a cis woman. And so I really want to acknowledge that. in terms of like my own choice to do this, I think that it was something that like my agent put the idea in front of me, and then I just kind of went with it without maybe fully appreciating what exactly I was signing up for. And I'm in a bunch of different ways, like not appreciating the ways in which it would be hard, but also not appreciating the ways in which it would serve me. I can, it's so much easier for me to do the writing that my job actually requires me to do because I know how to write a lot of words quickly because I had to fit the writing of this book into a specific time frame. So I think that it has ended up serving me, but I have to say, you don't know what book you're writing until the book starts to tell you about itself while you're writing. And that was, or I don't know, I'm making general declarations. That was my experience with it, is that the book told me about itself and it told me about me while I was writing. And so I didn't really know what I was signing up for. I thought it would be easier. I realize how I sound in saying that. And believe me, I've learned my lesson.
I can definitely relate to that. I think we are just about at time. If there's no lingering questions, I will ask a last one, which is, I guess, what do you want people to take away from the text? What do you want people to go away with after reading the book?
So something that's been on my mind a lot today, which I realized I had to like explain it to Twitter because I was like, this is going to be really weird. Why is she quoting like a dead white male Canadian politician? But when I lived in Canada, I came to really admire Jack Layton, who was the leader of the New Democratic Party while I was there, and who died of cancer in August of 2011. And in his farewell note to the community, he talked about the importance of being optimistic and being hopeful. And I think that the cosmos inspires optimism in us, and it inspires hope in us, and it gives us something to reach for. And in moments when there are so many things that make us feel like maybe hope is impossible, and that hope is even, as Maria Makaba talks about, is hard to practice, that spending time with the cosmos can be part of that hopeful practice. And I think that that was part of what I wanted to give back to people. I mean, I literally wanted to say, you are of the cosmos. When I sign copies of the book, this is sometimes what I write in the book, is that you are of the cosmos, that the cosmos belongs to you, that you belong to the cosmos, that we need to maintain that cosmic connection. And in doing so, it can sustain us. And sustaining ourselves in that way is particularly important in this moment, because we are now living in a world where the forces that know how to use sadness have gotten even more efficient at twisting the knife. I don't want to say it wasn't happening before, but they are learning to twist it in new ways, and we are feeling that. And that means that we need to find new ways to resist the damage, and also to tend to the wounds. And I think that the cosmos can be part of that. So I really want to encourage people to like look at the sky when you can, and remember there's a whole universe out there. And when you do get the opportunity to go somewhere where there's a dark night sky, and to advocate for safe lighting of our communities that keeps the light focus going downwards instead of upwards, that we see that as an issue for our communities, our urban communities, that children have the right to grow up with the night sky of their ancestors. And so we should endeavor to create the conditions where that happens.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moya, so much for, I thought I was going to flip this on you and ask you some questions about misogynoir, but here we are.
Here we are.
You're good. You're good.
I am.
That was such a really perfect note to end on. I think you all got us. Thank you for ending on a note of hope and optimism and looking up. I think we all needed that. So thank you, Chanda. Please buy the paperback edition if you haven't already, or any book. We put a bunch of links in the chat also to Misogynoir Transformed. Thank you so much for this incredible conversation. We really appreciate it. We hope that you will come to Chicago someday and we can hang out in person under the night sky somewhere. So thank you for all the love, all the support of indies. It means the world to us. So have a wonderful night. And anyone who missed this conversation, no worries. As Chanda said, all of this is recorded and viewable anytime. So
thank you so much.